it was a lot. And apparently I didn't manage my emotions very well. And I see that, I get that, but I did the best I could. And it's really hard, you want to feel like you did everything you could to take perfect care of this fresh little brand new baby you had in your arms. And I certainly tried. And it's hard when your kid says, "You did it all wrong, Mom."
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Family Disappeared podcast. Today, I get to sit in the driver's seat as host, and today's episode was hard to do. A near and dear topic for me is something that I've been walking through my entire life, and it's shame and guilt, whether I deserve it, or it's self-imposed. It is a heavy backpack, and my shame and guilt goes all the way back to being a child, where I felt responsible for taking care of my mother and her wounds. And it is something that I've learned. And with alienation and estrangement from my two older children, there are cycles of both guilt and shame that flow throughout my day-to-day life. And after getting into a 12-step program as PAA, Parental Alienation Advocates, I started to find support and relief and talk to people who are walking through some of the same situations. We all love our children. We are beating ourselves up for the people we're trying to be, coming out of our own family of dysfunction, because a lot of times that's where it starts. And though we try to avoid making those same mistakes, by default, we have become our parents. And that is not to say I blame my mother and father. It just is. So today we have Allison Garner, who will be joining us. She works in the corporate world as a coach, and also she works on an individual basis. She has written a few books, one of which is called Unconditional, where she talks about her own journey with her child. And I have two guests joining us just to have a sort of a roundtable where we can sit and talk about the effects of shame and guilt in our lives. And Allison brings to the table some beautiful thoughts about how we can walk through those times in our life and give ourselves some grace. I think we all need to remember we need to give ourselves grace as we journey through this. Also, if you could remember to subscribe to the podcast, send an email, tell us about your experience. Or if you'd like to even be a part of the podcast, it's a really great way to get involved. Also, we have a donate button, and everything that Allison has to offer, her website, her books, her TEDx talk, that will all be in the show notes. So hang on tight and welcome to the show. Today on the show, we will be having guest Allison Garner join us alongside Anna, who has been on a few podcasts, and introducing Juli, who's going to be joining us to have a discussion with Allison about shame and guilt. As alienated parents, we carry the heavy baggage of shame and guilt for things we have done, things we maybe have not done, and a lot of times just false beliefs we have that we've carried along our journey from the very beginnings of our existence. So before we get into things, I'm going to introduce Allison and give her an opportunity just to give you a little bit of background as to what she does. So Allison, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We are so lucky to have you here. So why don't you just share with us a little bit about what you do?
Mm. So I run a company called Thoughtly, and we do executive coaching and leadership development. What's interesting about any of that is where I learned how to have really tough conversations with people, and be able to walk a journey with people when they are scared, they're drowning in blame and shame, they're unsure of where to go, they've got all sorts of people problems and they don't know how to deal with conflict. Where I actually learned those skills was in family therapy with my own kids. And I come from an engineering background, so that's a very unlikely trajectory for an engineer who designed oil refineries to suddenly be able to have really deep, meaningful conversations with people and be able to hold that container. And I credit the therapeutic work I did, not only in Al-Anon. My husband's in recovery, and I come from a long line of addicts, so I found Al-Anon, and then I have two children, both of whom struggled mightily with mental health issues. I have one son who is also an addict, and um, they both have been in different therapeutic programs. And it was those programs where I think I learned a lot of the skills that I now bring into leadership circles, because I feel like parents are leaders and families are they're just another type of organization that humans tend to create in their lives. So that's why there's like this crossover, I think, with what I do with leaders of companies and executive teams. And I also work with parents inside of families with kids who are struggling or have alienated their own parents. And so I see a lot of similarity in both of those places. I'm not sure other people do, but that's how this all happened. But Georgette knows that about me.
You have done quite a lot. In fact, Allison has written a book, and she walked through a difficult period of time with her own daughter. It may not have been an alienation, but she's a parent nonetheless. And when we parent, whether it's alienation or your child is going through depression or mental illness, we carry sometimes shame and guilt for the things that we don't know how to fix or we want to fix. And I met Allison at a time of my life where I really didn't know what was happening with my own alienation with my children. I couldn't recognize it. And for me, I've been alienated, estranged really from my two children, my two older children, for about 18 months now. It's funny because 2.5 years ago, my oldest, who is estranged from me, introduced me to Allison. She did a lot of work for her. And I went to an event called The Captain of Control. And isn't that funny? She invited me to that. And that is where I kind of dipped my toe into, is this me? And then I found PAA a few months later, parental alienation. That's where I continued the journey. So we're just going to jump into things with shame and guilt part of it. As I was thinking about shame, I had to ask, is shame something that is innate in us? I feel as though, you think when we're potty training our kids, as they learn about themselves and their bodies, they hide. They know what's going on is that shame. So where does that fit in our life? Juli, do you find yourself having shame or guilt about what you may have done or didn't do when your kids were small?
Absolutely. I don't find me a parent that doesn't. But talking about what we first brought up was kids when they're young. And I think as parents, we tend to use shame and guilt as a tool to help guide our children in the right direction, what we feel is the right direction. And to some degree, I think it can be helpful. I tend to live my life, well, I mentioned earlier, I worked for a hotel company, and one of the things they taught us was don't do anything that if it's reported on the New York Times tomorrow, you will be ashamed of yourself. And we lived that. And I think to some degree, I tried to pass that on to my son. Like, if this gets reported about in the school newspaper tomorrow, how are you going to feel about that? And to some degree, I think it can be a positive thing. Obviously, it can be taken to extremes where you do get mired in guilt and shame for mistakes that you've made, because we've all made mistakes. I mean, I've told Gio that I've been fired more than once from a job. And, sure, I want to say that it was all the fault of the employer, but I clearly had responsibility there. And the hard part was getting over that setback and getting past the shame of, yeah, I screwed up and it's big. I got fired. I have to tell people I got fired. I have to figure out how to report that on my resume. I have to figure out how to answer that question the next time I go into a job interview. And it's hard. And I wish I could say that I didn't have to go through it more than once, but I did. And you do learn how to pick yourself back up and just, I mean, one thing I've learned is just to be honest and say, yeah, I got fired from that job and explain it.
Right. And, Allison, when you're dealing with, families or even, people are people, whether you're in the job, in your workspace, or you're a stay-at-home mom, we are all still walking through life. And for whatever reason, whatever we've learned in our past, we bring it into every facet of our life. So as we're dealing with this, how do we change the way we approach when we see our kids failing, or we see them going down the wrong path, or they're slipping out of our fingers because we don't know how to control it? How do we reframe that up?
One of the things that I learned when our daughter was in a residential program, she was in that program for over a year. So, I mean, it was a significant program. And then we would have family weekends where we would go, and we got supported as well. So we would have therapy with a therapist. Our daughter would have therapy. Then we would have therapy with our daughter. All of this was done virtually. And then we would travel there every 6 weeks. It was very intensive. And the thing that they pointed out very early on, and I didn't know this, and I think it's one of the main reasons that my daughter still talks to me today, and it is that the only collateral that we have is the relationship. And when they reframed that for me, I didn't get it, because they said relationship before task. And I was like, and my husband's like, light bulbs went off, and there were other people in the room and the light bulb went off. And I was like, what are they talking about? And my husband's like, oh my God, it's so great. It's, you put the relationship before the task. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And anyway, so now I've come to understand that it's like, the way that I word it now is we go through the relationship, not around it. So when my daughter or my son is melting or unraveling or having some kind of a conflict or whatever, or they're struggling with something, I start at the relationship now. And I didn't know that. And now that I can start there, because what I want to do is tell them what to do. I want to control things. I want to fix it. I want to save them, and I want to rescue them, manipulate them, whatever. Like, I'm a people pleaser and recovering people pleaser, but it's part of how I parent. It's part of how I be in the world, and I'm working on it. And when I see somebody that I love, I'm so invested in them and their suffering, I almost can't not solve it for them, right? And when I learned this relationship before task, it like gave me a reason to pause and say, okay, put the relationship first. And what I do then is I get my daughter, or I get my son, or I get the person in front of me. When I say get them, I listen to what it is they are saying to me, and I validate, I get curious, I open my heart. Instead of having all the answers in my intellectual monkey brain up here, I drop down into my heart and I connect with them. And I don't know that either of my kids would talk to me today. Um, my son, we had him gooned, if you guys know what that is. He was 17, he was a raging alcoholic already. We were seeing the days of our control slowly slipping away. And when you have a kid gooned, you have them escorted with two giant men in the middle of the night. It's probably one of the worst days of my entire life. They just show up in your house at like 4 in the morning, and you just hope that your kid doesn't flip out. And then they put him in a van and they take him to the airport and they take him to the program. And
How did your son?
oh, he was real pissed. He was real pissed. And that was 6 months of like, F you and how dare you. And I'm going to run away from the program when I turn 18 and all of that. And we just kept putting the relationship first. Like, it wasn't about him running away. It wasn't about what had happened. It was like, we care so much about you. This is the only thing that matters. I understand you're angry. We just kept going in through the relationship. And I think it's really the only reason that he talks to us anymore, because we just kept showing up for him and not making it about all of the stuff that was happening. It wasn't about the drinking. It wasn't about the gooning. It wasn't about not giving him enough chances. It wasn't about all the times he'd been arrested and, he's flunking out of school and all of that. Like, it wasn't about any of that. It was like, we want to be able to trust you. We want to be able to connect with you. That's the only thing that matters in this world.
Any tips for people to be able to, I get what you're saying and I try and model that myself, but in order to keep that sort of a neutral stance when you're talking to him about this is about the relationship, so you're not bringing to the table what he's done, what he hasn't done, what he needs to do. How, for yourself, were you able to keep showing up like that? Did you have?
That's a great question. I have a practice that I use where I call it getting complete. I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially I run through like, how did things go? And I let myself be a victim. Like, it's a journaling exercise. I say all the things I've ever wanted to say. Nobody ever sees what I write, but I be the victim, right? I say all the horrible, terrible, no good, very bad things. I just let it all out. I get it out of my system. Energetically, I'm just going to release all of it. So I write it all down and I keep going until I run out of steam. And then when I'm done with that part, then I write, how did I contribute, right? Not how did I cause, but how did I contribute? How did I contribute to my son, to his drinking, to his dropping, getting arrested, to his, bad behaviors? How did I contribute? I didn't cause any of it, but what was I doing that could have contributed to that impact and to the dynamic that was being created? And so I call it mad, sad, glad, because that's mad is like, yay, I get to be a victim. And then sad is like, oh, I actually have some, ownership here. And then the final letter is, or the final journaling exercise is, how do I acknowledge who he is in the world? Not how he's showing up, not all of the behaviors, but like, in my language, I say, who is he being? Who does he be in this world? My son, like, he be connection, he be grace, he be seeker, he be oasis. Like, he's all of these beautiful attributes. And when I can get back to who he is deep down inside, not all of the mess that he is on the outside sometimes, then I can relate to him there. But that's a practice, and I've been practicing that for years. The first few times I did it, I'm like, this is stupid and I hate these letters and I don't want to do it anymore.
That was a great question, Anna. And, I'm thinking back as I've walked through the disintegration of, my family with my kids. I did not have a good set of tools like that to be able to have the wherewithal to maybe look at my kids during my divorce and be able to make that connection to speak to them in that way. I piled my own life is messy, like you say. Life is messy, and it was messy. And it seemed as though I put all this responsibility and shame on myself. I didn't know how to navigate that until I got into PAA, Parental Alienation Anonymous, and I was able to. And it takes time to see, the part that we play in our messes or in our kids' lives and how that looks. And it takes a while to deconstruct the scaffolding or that we had in our lives previous to walking through this. And I think a lot of what we learned in our early years and in our past with our parents, and this isn't to blame our parents, it just is, and it's carryover. And I truly did not know how to save myself at the time and with my kids. And so, even ladies, Anna, while you were walking through, this very tumultuous time with your family, as it was dissolving and your kids were struggling and you could feel it and see it, did you feel like you knew how to save it? Like you could grasp with all that you were putting on yourself trying to survive? How did that feel?
That's a great question, Gio. I told myself I could save it. I lent into my dysfunctional behaviors, and I told myself I would be the champion of the day and that I would change the outcome for my family and the family I created, because I didn't want it to mirror my family of origin. So I had all of that narrative and dialogue in my head and was repeating the same dysfunctional behaviors. And I realize now, expecting a different result in the same breath. I mean, I have through program, I have compassion for my younger self, myself as a parent, because I didn't know how to do any differently. But there is guilt and there is shame around that, because a lot of the decisions I made, I told myself that I made them for the good of the family as a whole, and especially for my kids. But in reality, a lot of the decisions I made were based on what my nervous system felt like. And I responded the way had been modeled for me, which in the same instance is not blaming my parents. It's the way I was raised. And so I kept going back to those behaviors. And then I've been unpacking that in recovery, and I'm able to identify it and have compassion for my younger self as a parent. But it was interesting. I think I felt like I was in control, but I was also so disconnected from myself that I was doing damage control, and I was trying to navigate. I was trying to protect my kids, and I was going to say trying to protect myself. I wasn't really, because I didn't value myself enough to even think. I wasn't on the radar. It was about my kids at that point, and was even when I left the marriage, and was really until I joined PAA and discovered a program that translated to me to be working on myself. And when I have a good connection and relationship with myself, then I come to the table and am able to have a healthier relationship with other people, and not just my kids, but with people I work with, friendships that I have. And I knew I didn't have the skills to do that earlier on in my life, but I didn't know what it looked like. And I mean, I channeled a lot of my energy into my kids. And I did the best that I could as a parent with the tools that I had. But there is guilt and there is shame around that. And it's interesting that I thought that I was in control, and I'm desperately trying to control a whole series of everything that was going on that was very dramatic. I had no control over any of it, but I was programmed to, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna take on all this negative energy, and then I will save the day. And that was my mantra almost. And it kind of feels icky saying that out loud, but that was all I knew how to do. And now, thankfully, because of program, I have a broader perspective and I have more compassion for myself and everyone involved in my family dynamics, the family that I married into and the family generations going back as well, because this is really challenging stuff.
Yes, it's challenging and it's baffling. In my situation, for a good 10 years in my own situation, and I was, preparing for this podcast, it took me down a road, and I could handle it. I handle it better now because I'm in a place of healing, and really, I don't know if I know all my blind spots, but I am hungry to learn and wipe this unrealistic focus on myself to shame myself. I literally took everything at the time that was coming in that was negative. I wrote down on a piece of paper nearly 11 years ago, my ex had told me, "You don't stand a chance with your children and you never will." And for some reason, I wrote that down. I dated it and I put it away. And I found it. And I'm trying to understand what the reasoning behind where that came from. That the shame, like you, oh, it's all you. And I can throw that away. I can throw that away. But Allison, help us understand, like, what is that? Why do we do that to ourselves?
The way that I tend to look at things is that if something hits a nerve, he knew that that would hit a nerve. It's why he said it. The purpose of him saying that was to hurt. Okay. And he did it because he knew it would hurt, because you've got a raw nerve for being a shitty mom. One of your deepest fears and probably your deepest belief is that you are a shitty mom. So when people touch that nerve or even like sneeze on it or look at it wrong, you're just like, whoop, and it hurts. You have a reaction to it. And when we can start to look at these deep-seated beliefs that we don't even want to admit that we have, it's like what Anna is saying, is then, okay, we don't look at those and then like make them wrong about ourselves. We look at them and we have grace and compassion for those parts of ourselves. It's normal to be afraid that we're shitty moms. That's normal. That's a good thing. Like, we should worry about that because it means we probably want to do a good job.
Yeah, right.
And yet there's still, I don't know about you, but when people point at my children as though they are a reflection of my parenting, there's a real raw nerve there.
Yeah.
And
Real raw.
oh my God, still, or when people talk about their kids and their accolades and their accomplishments, it hits that raw nerve, even though it has nothing to do with me. I think it hit because it's something that you are still wrestling within yourself, probably. If someone said you had purple hair, you wouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to write that down and keep it.
Right. And it was so long ago. And I think about, Juli, right now, kind of explain your situation with your child, what that looks like.
So I am the alienated mom of a 14-year-old son. He's about to be 15. Actually, I walked into 12-step program 12 years ago to the day today. I did not know when I married my first husband that he was a drug addict. I had no idea. And, everybody says, how do you not know? I didn't know. And I was married to him for 5 years, and I finally figured out what was wrong, where the money was going, why he had these mood swings, why he came home at 7 o'clock in the morning. I finally figured it all out. And I left him and then found out I was pregnant. And he, of course, said he was going to be better. Everything was going to be better. And it was for a while. But 12 years ago today, he and I got in a fight with my 2-year-old son still in his high chair. And I caught him shooting up like 20 feet away. And I felt like I had about 15 minutes to decide the rest of my life. And I said, you don't have to go to rehab, but you can't stay here. And that was it. That was the end. And, I felt like I had to do that to protect my son. And so my son had to deal with having a divorced family starting at age 2. And despite my ex's problems, I wanted to make sure that my son had both of his parents in his life. So we split custody. And my son had a lot of trouble. He had a lot of trouble in school. He had a diagnosis that's now disputed, but he had a lot of outbursts. And flash forward, he started a new school for 8th grade. And I knew that this could be trouble because he doesn't do well with change. And about a month into school, they had an a suicide awareness assembly. And he came home and said, Mom, I think I need to tell you I want to kill myself. So I immediately got him a therapist, and he saw the therapist. And the next thing I knew, he was hospitalized. And the next thing I knew after that, I got an email that said my custody had been revoked because my son made allegations that I was abusive, which have since been disproven. And my son has admitted that he made that up. He needed a reason to explain why he was so sad, and that was his reason. And I know more now that it has to do with the divorce, and he just hated having two houses, and he feels that it was my fault. It's my fault that he has two houses. And and it's hard. I have told him, we know in the program that secrets keep you sick. So I have always tried to be honest with him at ages that I thought he was ready for it. And when he asked me point blank, is my dad an alcoholic? I said yes. And as he got older, he asked if it was more than alcohol, was he also a drug addict? And I said yes. And one of the things that I'm in so much trouble for is saying yes and telling him the truth. But I felt it was important for him to know the truth and to know his family history. And sure, I contributed to the divorce in some ways. And being a single mom and having his dad was not supportive for a while. He eventually came around. Single mom with a kid who was having numerous outbursts, and they were threatening to kick him out of school. I mean, from the time he was 3, they were threatening to kick him out of school. He had to have a full-time shadow for 2 years that I had to pay for. It was a lot. And apparently I didn't manage my emotions very well. And I see that, I get that, but I did the best I could. And it's really hard. You want to feel like you did everything you could to take perfect care of this fresh little brand new baby you had in your arms. And I certainly tried. And it's hard when your kid says, "You did it all wrong, Mom." So it's hard. I mean, just last night, I have him for a few hours a week. And just last night, he was telling me, the divorce is your fault. The reason I have two houses is your fault. The reason I've been separated from you for 15 months is your fault. And I think the hardest thing is I could admit that I contributed. I have a hard time understanding how to have that conversation with my 14-year-old. And there's so much that I want to say of like, it wasn't all me, but I know that that's not helpful. And last night I ended up just trying to stay quiet because I felt like there's nothing I can say that's going to come out positive.
And shame is a heavy, wet blanket to carry around, And with that shame, do you turn into it and acknowledge it? Do you turn away from it? And do you bring that up to your kids, what you are going through with that shame? As I am alienated, for example, I have adult children, my children are adults. And I am at a point in my life where I am not afraid. I want to uncover. I'm very aware of, oh my gosh, I was walking in shame. I wanted to hide from sporting events. They thought I didn't love them. I would go to sporting events and my kids would act like they didn't hear me. I tried to show up at places. I would pick and choose what felt safe for me. And all those years, and I never spoke my truth. I was fully open. I stepped away from my marriage, and I was making decisions at the time that were not me. My kids, I raised my kids in a Christian home. My daughters called me the Proverbs 31 mom, and I shattered that. In my pain, on my journey of my own life, I changed the trajectory of their life. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that, I love, and that is a heavy burden to carry. Juli still, she has a connection. She has a child that's coming and going. And what do we do with that? How do we work through that? And do we address it with our kids that, hey, this is where I'm at? Or do we wait for them to come back to us? We hold the keys. Holy cow. Yeah, this stuff is real and it hurts. And you can see through the emotion that this is stuff that is hard to uncover. It's hard to walk through. And as parents, we just want to love our kids. And talking about our shame and guilt is really part of the healing. And the only way we are going to be able to move forward is to heal ourselves. And when that healing starts to happen, we affect everyone else around us. And it might be scary, different. And my experiences with my children, they don't know who I am anymore. And I don't experience things the same way that I used to. And I'm working on me to try to change the trajectory of what the future might look like with my kids. And in the meantime, we're going to keep walking through this topic of shame and guilt. So join us again next week for the second half of Shame and Guilt with Allison. And remember to always subscribe, share, put this stuff out on your own social media. The only way we are going to heal ourselves and shed some light on this is life. This is a journey we are all walking through in some way, shape, or form. And we just want to love our kids. And if anyone hasn't told you today, you are lovable. You are worth it. You are worthy. And take care. See you next time.